Welcome to the Elokus channel, and we are now going to class number 3 in the second discourse of the Maamor in the grand discourse series of discourses of Bishash Ekdimu 5672. This discourse is the second discourse called Oteh Kasalma, and this is class number 3 in this discourse, which would make it class number 23 in the general series. Okay, so we are holding over here in the middle of chapter 5, and yesterday we were learning how, just like in the human experience, there is the oil, the light goes into energy goes into a particular vessel in the body, so too in God's body, so to speak, which is the set of spheros of attributes that make up what he refers to as Adam Ha'elyon, the supernal man, which is a phrase the Kabbalists use, which is basically taken from the image that Yecheskel saw when he saw the Merkava. He saw God, he saw an image of man, and as we discussed, that's the image of intelligence and emotions that make up the human psyche, and the Zohar goes so far to refer to it as the right arm. The chesed, the kindness, is the right arm. The gevura, the judgment and discipline, is the left arm. Tiferes, the compassion or beauty or truth, is the torso, and so on and so forth, implying the concept that not only is there a energy form, there's also vessels, just like we use the term arm, left arm, right arm, which are all vessels. There is guf and there is oir. And in the oil, the light goes into the kalim, goes into the vessels. Each vessel is particular fashioned to fit the light. And yesterday we were talking a little bit, we don't have to go so much into this because this is going to become later. Sometimes I touch upon something just briefly, just to give an idea. I don't want to get into it too much because it's not the place. As we will be taking the Torah through all the entire spiritual apparatus, the entire spiritual range, we will have enough time to explore every little part in so much detail. But we were just touched upon the concept that although we call the spheros of Atzilus, we call them an image of a man, we have to understand it in its utmost abstraction. We also need to understand that the spheros over there, as he explained earlier, are infinite. If they're infinite, they can't be too defined. They can't be too specified. They're very vague, and obviously the light, the vessels, are far more vague and far more unpronounced than the vessels. The vessels give and characterize and define the energy to a much greater degree, giving it so much more substance. But even in the vessels itself, even after the light settles into the vessels, it still is two things. It's Ein Sof, he calls them, Essa Spherois. The term he used earlier is that the Essa Spherois are Midos with the Lashon, the words he uses over here, that Midas on Esser, a phrase from the book of Yetzirah, the book of formation. Their Midah, their measurement is 10, She'ein Lehem Sof, they have no end, although they're 10. And as we explained, another phrase, it calls it Essa Spheros, the 10 attributes, Belima, without substance, which means that don't get too carried away with the sphera element. Don't get too caught up with the definitions, because realize that when you look at these attributes, you will hardly see them. Belima, they don't have any substance. Now, when we say without substance in the material world, that's a negative, without substance. But when we say without substance in the godly realm, it's a positive. It means it's not limited. Any substance that we can define something by a particular substance, that's a limiting, that's a constriction that limits it to be only one thing and nothing else. But when something is free and undefined, and we're talking about an energy, the more unsubstantial it is, the more infinite and boundless it is. So the spheros of Atzilus, both in the world of Atzilus and the world of emanation, not so once it starts descending into the lower worlds, which over them, remember, we refer to that as the mushaguf, the image of a body. Then it becomes more more stiff. Each sphera, each attribute is more rigid. Each attribute is more defined and more confined. By being defined, it's more confined to one specific. But in Atzilus, it's very freestyle and infinite, and even the vessels. The light is way above that. Okay, once we got that, so the last point he was saying, how the vessels are compatible with the light. And every light has its unique vessel that can facilitate, and according to the nature of the vessel, so will be the light. And the last thing we learned was, just like there's a difference between the vessel of Chachma is different than the vessel of Bina. We know in our own physical anatomy, the right side of the brain is the vessel of Chachma, where the Chachma, where the wisdom takes place. The left side of the brain is where the Bina, the analytical part of the brain is the left side of the brain. That's where the Bina. And the nature and the substance of the vessel is different. We mentioned it in one of the classes earlier, that the right side of the brain is a little more wet and cool. The left side of the brain is hotter and dry. And it fits the physical anatomy, fits the nature of Bina. When something is hot and dry, it usually crumbs. It brings out the details. When you put something in a fire, it dissects something. It usually it breaks something down to its pieces. That's what Bina does. Bina takes a concept and dissects it to all the tiny little details. The Bina is when you analyze something, you find all the details and sub-details. Chachma is the opposite. Chachma is a connecting force. It's to find the main point where everything is unified in that one point. And that's what moisture does. Wet and coolness is that it has that quality. He doesn't speak about this over here. I'm just using this as an example to help understand that the vessel of Chachma and the vessel of Bina are compatible with the energy, and as they are in our human physical body, so it is also in the divine body above, that the Chachma and the Bina are vessels. The vessels of the Chachma and the Bina are matching the nature of the spiritual energy of the Chachma and the Bina. Now we continue further. Now what he's using over here is in the midos, he's going to show us how the vessels come in different levels. That the vessels are not just all the same, just a little bit of a different shoe size. That's not that. It's a complete different experience of vessels. And you can see it very strongly when you compare the vessels of the intelligence to the vessels of the emotions. Even more, it's more starkly noticed and differentiatable when we analyze the emotion vessels in comparison to the intellectual vessels versus the difference between the two vessels of the intelligence. In the intelligence itself, since both vessels are intelligent, are for intellect, both vessels are close to the same, although as I mentioned earlier, they're still different. As we spoke about the composition of being dry or wet, kind of a thing. Obviously, in the abstract lights of Atzilus, you can't speak of dry and wet in the same way that we speak about it in the physical. But where we're going to really see the difference is he's going to show us how, in the intelligence versus the emotions, how different the vessels are. So it is in the emotions of kindness and severity, where the vessel of kindness, the container of kindness, is a different type of a vessel, which means the makeup of the right hand is different in the human, in the physical person, than the makeup of the left hand, of the physical anatomy of the left hand, although they pretty much look the same, but they're different. And the same is also above. Now, here we don't really see so much the difference of the levels of vessels. We will see it in a moment. He's going to get to it. Sheyesh l'chol or, every light has kli miyuchedes, has its own unique, individual, personalized keli. As it is known, sheyesh bekelim, as it is known that there are in the vessels chilukei madreges, there is various different levels. As it's stated in Eitz Chaim as follows. Eitz Chaim is the writings of the Ari. And what does it say? Over there it says, the chiyuhu hu b'chinas hamoichin v'garmuhu b'chinas hamidos. Over there it says that his life giving animations is the level of mochin, are the level of the brain level, the vessels of the intelligence. The garmu and the garments, pchinos midos, are referring to the emotions. So it says in Eitz Chaim. Ubigeres HaKodesh. Now I know this is. I'm just going to read another line so that we get the whole picture, and then we'll discuss it. Ubigeres HaKodesh Isa, but in the letters in the back of the Alter Rebbe's of the Tanya. In Tanya, there's the fourth section of Tanya, which are the holy letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote. So in those letters, a lot of times he gives very deep, fundamental explanations in Kabbalistic concepts. So in one of those letters, he explains the chiyuhu, that when it says chiyuhu, life-giving animations, hu or, it's referring to the lights. The garmu, and when it says garments, pchenas kelim, hakelim, that's referring to the vessels. What is he saying over here? Again, I have no clue what he's saying in essence, because whenever we're learning this, we shouldn't even begin to pretend that we know, because we don't know. But at the same time, it's a mitzvah to know. So because it's a mitzvah to know, maybe as we're getting closer to Mashiach, we could know. But I just want to we have to always keep in mind that we're talking about things that we were given permission to explore, but we should always realize that they're so much greater than anything that we can even begin to imagine that we understand, but yet we could understand. So that's the cool part about it. No one can understand, and yet everybody could understand. It's both together simultaneously. But in any case, let's go back. What is he saying over here? He's saying there is a statement in the Zohar. In the Zohar it says, the Zohar wants to express how God is perfectly one. And when we're going to start exploring all the various different attributes and aspects of the divine realm, we shouldn't, God forbid, fall into the trap of believing that it's all like pieced up, that there's a bunch of pieces and that God is a composite, he's made up of a whole bunch of parts. The Zohar is trying to defend God's unity. So what does the Zohar say? Zohar says he himself, v'chiyihu, and his life flows, which means his life-giving animations. Because as we discussed earlier, God himself is beyond being a life force to the creation. Because the creations couldn't tolerate God's truth. If God's truth and his true substance of being would be revealed in the creations, we would instantly dissolve out of existence into him. There wouldn't be no time and space. There couldn't be any even subtle form of existence at all. So therefore God has to hide himself from the creations. How then does he interact with the creations? He emanates rays of light, we might call it. Flows of energy. And these are the oros, the lights, right? So the life-giving forces that emanate from God to create the world. So that's called chiyuhu. Now but the Zohar says he and his life-giving forces, vigarmuhu, and his garments, chad, are all one. That means don't and ever make a mistake that there is him and then there is an entity, his life-giving forces. They're a separate substance, they're a separate entity. And then there is these garmu, which are his garments. We'll soon see what that might be, those garments, those vessels, those garments, or whatever they are. Don't make the mistake and think of all of this as separate entities. Realize that Hashem unifies with them and becomes completely, and he is one with them, and there's no separation between him and his emanations and his garments. So now the question is, what does it mean by his life-giving forces, and what does it mean his garments? So in general, before we differentiate between the two, what the Zohar is trying to say is that God and the sphirot and the attributes are one. Hashem and his kindness are one. Hashem and his judgment are one. Hashem and his intelligence, his wisdom is one. Hashem and his understanding is one. Hashem with all the 10 attributes are perfectly one. They're not like the human experience. The human experience, our wisdom, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, is added to us. Our kindness is added to us. We're not perfectly one with all of our features. But by God, everything is him and he is everything. indifferentiable from him. He becomes completely unified with these emanations to the point that they are all just one singular being. Okay, there's a lot to think deeply about what this means. So that's the general gist of what the Zohar is saying. However, paying closer attention to the statement of the Zohar, you see the Zohar is pointing out him and his life, chiyu, comes from the word chai, life-giving emanations. And garmu means a garments. Actually fits with the word garmu, is like the root of the word garment. Or garmu can also mean vessels, as we'll see. So what does it refer to? Well, now we understand. So the Alter Rebbe says, okay, the Alter Rebbe in Igeres HaKodesh, in this letter that we mentioned earlier, explains that when the Zohar says his life-giving emanations, it's referring to the light of the Sfirot, the energy that flows in the Sfirot, the soul of the Spheros, of the attributes. And when it mentions the garments, it's referring to the vessels of the Spheres. Because remember, as we discussed, the attributes are like in the image of man. They're in the image of man, they have a soul and a body, just like a human is a soul and a body. The vessels of the Sfirot are far more the limitations of the attributes, and the energy of the attributes is far more the less limited, infinitely less limited. The energy, the power, the godly, the Ein Sof, what is reflecting the more of the Ein Sof light, that's more the energy, right? So there's the energy and there is the vessels. Now what the Zohar is saying that he and his chiyuhu, v'garmuhu, are one, it means that God is number one. The emanations, there's two. First of all, is the Ein Sof, that, as we said, is above emanating into the attributes. That's we discussed earlier, or makif, it's encompassing lights. And there is energy that's even higher than makif, than encompassing. It's even above being an encompassing energy. But we're talking about the light. When it says chiyu, it means the life-giving forces that become the soul of the vessels, the soul of the Sfirot, that become the soul of the supernal man above. The divine spirit that emanates all the attributes. God is one with that. And not only that, he's even one with the vessels. Garmuhu means the vessels. And the Alter Rebbe explains in many places, for that reason, it differentiates, and it says he is one with his emanations, and he is one with his garments. Why can't it just say he and ihu v'chiyuhu v'garmuhu chad? Translate, he, his life-giving emanations, and his garments are one. Doesn't say that. It says he and his emanations are one, and he and his garments are one, setting them into two separate oneness. And the Alter Rebbe explains, because the depth of oneness, the level of oneness that he is with the oros, with the lights, with the emanations, is deeper and stronger than his oneness with the garments. The garments are a step less, if you might say, in the oneness as he is one with the emanations. The emanations are on a deeper level of oneness, meaning less pronounced, more absorbed in his infinity, and the garments are a little more pronounced, and therefore they're also one with him, but not on the same level of oneness as the emanations. But that's the Alter Rebbe's interpretation, okay? Again, that the emanations means the lights, and the garments are the vessels. However, there is a teaching in Eitz Chaim from the Arizal, where the Holy Ari says, his interpretation is that, again, the Ari was a great Kabbalist who lived about 1,000 years after the Zohar, maybe more, something like that. Yeah, about I think like 1,100 or 1,200 years after. So he's giving commentary on the Zohar. He says that when it says him and his emanations are one, it's referring to they're both talking about Sfirot. Him and his emanations and him and his garments are one, are both talking about attributes. But unlike the Alter Rebbe, who says that the emanations are referring to the soul of the attributes, and the garments are referring to the body, the vessels of the attributes, in Eitz Chaim it says, in the Arizal it says, that the emanations are referring to the intellectual attributes, And the garments are referring, or the vessels, or the garments, karmu, are referring to the emotional attributes. Because we know there's 10 sfirot, right? So the 10 spheros begin with 3 intellectual attributes, which are higher. Just like in a human being, the intelligence is higher than the emotions. And the emotions are the next level. They're lower. Therefore, the Arizal interprets as follows. That when the Zohar says he and his emanations are one, it's referring to him being one with his intelligence. And when it says that he and his garments are one, is referring to his oneness with his emotions. And being that the emotions are lower than the intelligence is called his life-giving life emanations. They're called life because they're much higher. And emotions are called garments because they're lower. Okay, a garment is already considered much lower than a life flow, than an energy emanating. So this is the way the Arizal translates. So what the Rebbe Rashab is saying, what the author, what we're learning over here is says, how can now we reconcile the Alter Rebbe and the Ari? Are they arguing, or are really they saying the same thing? It seems like they're giving 2 interpretations on something so important. The Alter Rebbe says the energy is called the life, the chiyuhu, the life-giving emanations, and the vessels is called the garments. Which vessels? The vessels of all the sfirot. According to the Alter Rebbe, it's the vessels of all the spheros are called the garments. The energy of all the spheros are called chiyuhu, emanations. However, according to the Arizal, it's different. The intelligence is called life-giving emanations. Both the body of the intelligence, the vessels of the intelligence, and the energy of the intelligence. They're both called chiyuhu. The emotions are both called garments, both the body of the emotions and the soul of the emotions. So which one is correct? Are they arguing? However, the Rebbe is saying over here, it's not an argument. Why is it not an argument? Because this shows to us how different the vessels are. The Alter Rebbe is right, of course, gives a perfect definition that vessels are called garments, and soul energy and the aura, the light, is called emanations. That's simple. Why is the Ari then saying that the intelligence is called lights, is called chiyu, life-giving forces, and the emotions are called vessels? And that is because, this is the main point over here, that is because the vessels of the intelligence, the kalim of the intelligence, are so refined, they're so elegant, they're so unnoticeable, they're so subtle that you wouldn't even know that it's a vessel. It feels like even the body is pure soul. The body of the intellectual attributes of God, the body doesn't look like a body. It's so subtle, it's so refined, it's so elevated, it's so unaware of itself, if you might say. It's so weightless that it doesn't even look like a body. It too is considered energy. It's a thicker energy than the energy of the soul, but still even the body is considered energy. That's why, true in general, we say that vessels are called garments, but there's one exception. The vessels of the intelligence are not really vessels. They're all energy because they're so sublime, they're so elevated, they're so refined. On the other hand, on the level of the garments, that he doesn't say over here. On the level of the emotions are thicker. So it would seem to imply, although he doesn't say it, so I'm maybe afraid to say it, maybe I shouldn't say it. Okay, I'm stopping. I'm not going to say it because he doesn't say it, so I'm not going to say it on my own. Okay? But bottom line is, what do we see? We see that the garments, that vessels, so what does the Rebbe want over here? what the Rebbe wants over here, what the author, what the Rebbe Rashab is saying, is take a look how different vessels are. The vessels of the intelligence are so elevated that they themselves are called energy. They're not even called vessels. They can be called chiyuhu. They can be called life-giving emanations. Versus the vessels of the emotions, they're already much lower, and they're called garmuhu. They're called garments. See? So that's what he's saying over here. Let's read it again. Like I stated in Eitz Chaim, the chiyuhu, that the life-giving emanations, that's the intelligence. That's the mochin. The level of intelligence. Vigarmuhu, that when the Zohar says garmuhu, which means garments, b'chinas midos, that's called emotions. Ubigeres HaKodesh, but in Tanya it says, Isa it says, the chiyu hi or, that the life-giving emanations is the light. Vigarmuhu, and the garments, b'chinas hakelim, is the vessels. So how do we reconcile the both? Vahainu, here is where the Rebbe resolves it, and he says like this, the b'moichin, because in the brain, in the level of Mochin, in the level of Chabad, the Chachma bin Adas, Gama Kelim, even the vessels, Hem P'chinis Chiyuhu. They're so refined that they too are considered life-giving emanations. Shehem Kemoy Ha'or, they're so close to being light. Va'al Kain, and precisely because of that, Hem Kelim L'kilu Ora Moichin. And that's the reason why they can be vessels for the illumination of the intelligence. In other words, in order to be to be a vessel, a container, for the vastness of the revelation of the divine intelligence, you can't be too stiff. If the vessels would be super rigid and stiff, that they would really be a vessel, they can never receive the brilliant light of the intelligence. So they have to be so refined. Similar that we say sometimes, it says about certain tzaddikim, that their bodies, their physical bodies, were holier, were more refined and godlier than the souls of average people. The soul, how can you compare a body to a soul? Physical body. But people who worked on their bodies, and they elevated their bodies to such level of holiness that their bodies was much holier than our souls. And this is the similar idea, that the vessels of the mochin are considered energy. The kelim, the midos, shenikru garmuhu, and the vessels of the midos, of the emotions, which are called garmuhu, which are called garments, hem kelim, they're only kelim, they're kelim, but because they're thicker and they're denser, and therefore they're really, you can see them as vessels, and that's why, because they're denser and they're thicker, the mochin cannot go into them. Rak la'or hamidos, they are vessels only for the light of the emotions. They're only, and not for the Or HaMoichin, because the light of the Mochin is too abstract for it to come into such thick vessels. Now, when I say such thick, we have to always keep on remembering we're talking about God's vessels, where even the vessels of the Midos are also Ein Sof, they're also infinite. We have to always remember that when we talk over here, we're always speaking relative. Relative to this is called a vessel. Okay. We're going to leave it over here. This was a little bit of we're going to get used to really, really stretching our minds, doing exercises, and it's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And how beautiful, because we're getting to explore. This is like the days of Mashiach. We can take a half an hour a day and just melt our minds into pure divine thought. Everyone, let's merit to see Mashiach today.